Hi folks, quick video today updating some of the components of my last video given the recent erratas and some mistakes I made during the video. I'll then go through my opinions about erratas and changing how a card reads and functions, as well as reflexive triggers in general. I'll finish up by presenting the scenarios again in a more polished form for completeness, and there's also a bonus question at the end. If you'd like to skip to that, you can look at the description. Consult the past. In this scenario, I incorrectly stated that hidden requires you to wait until your next turn. I need to be a lot more intentional with my language in future. Hidden requires you to wait until the next turn and not your next turn, which is obviously a really meaningful difference. Falling Star. The big one, Falling Star and Decathian Rain were errated, so they no longer put reflexive triggers on the chain. Instead, you choose a target for each instance of the effect as written on the card. Deflect as a keyword was also changed for clarity and now explicitly states that you must pay power for each instance of targeting. This completely obliterates the scenario and makes it fully redundant. Now, as soon as you play Falling Star, as a mandatory part of paying the cost of the spell, you have to pay 2 power. Imperial Decree. Not a ruling issue, just a lesson for me to put the optimal solution at the end of scenarios. As many people pointed out, and no doubt most Victor players would know, the optimal play in this scenario is to send recruits in one by one, killing a dead bloom each time. That will make you completely clear the battlefield. Reaver's Row. Alright, this one is a really humbling one for me. It seems like a pretty easy situation that will occur relatively commonly, but there are 2 different scenarios that you need to consider. What happens in combat and what happens outside of combat, and that was where my confusion was. Basically, it's distilled down to this. If a scenario is a combat situation, then what matters is who is attacking and who is defending. An easy way to think about this is during the sequence of combat, attackers are designated first, so attack triggers go first on the chain, then defenders are designated next, so defend triggers go on next. In reality, these triggers are put first as pending items before being finalized together on the chain, but that's adding complexity to the rules that probably isn't necessary for this level of question. Maybe one day it will be relevant and I can add a 4th difficulty level. If the scenario is a non-combat situation, it matters whose turn it is. In the Reaver's Row scenario, I stated this to be the case, but as people pointed out, this is accidentally correct. But in other situations it wouldn't be. So remember, attack triggers go on the chain first, defend triggers next. Then, first in, last out, the defend trigger will resolve first. I've been wanting to discuss my thoughts about erratas for quite a while. I was planning on making a full video on it, but I decided I'll just cover it in this video instead. I think erratas in general can be grouped into 3 categories. Some are more forgivable than others. First, erratas that do not change what the card does, but are refining a card in terms of wording or formatting. Usually this is done to improve clarity or readability of the card's effect, or to future-proof the language should new mechanics be printed. This is the most forgivable in my mind, and shows that a card game is investing in its long-term future. Compare this to Magic the Gathering, which has constantly iterated on its wording and formatting for decades. Let's look at Clone, for example. Originally printed in 1993 in Alpha, the first ever Magic the Gathering set, reprinted in 2002 in Onslaught with significantly changed wording, then in 2010 with M10, with what its wording is today. What's most important to me here is that the spirit of the card remains the same, and if you read the lengthy original, you can still play with it on a kitchen table and understand what you're doing most of the time. Whether you feel the changes to Decathian Rain and Falling Star are in this category, or the third one is up for debate, but generally speaking, improving language and clarity only serves to improve a game in the long run. Erratas that change cards that were incorrectly printed in the first place, obviously a lot less forgivable, particularly when it's occurring in this volume. But still okay given the design process of Riftbound to date. Since it was produced in China before essentially being ported over to an English version, some things were lost in translation. Completely omitting parts of text, such as until end of turn, that's pretty rough. They will cause the reading of cards to be meaningfully different from the function of the card, leading to confusion and feel bad moments at locals. No one really wants to be on the giving or receiving end of feeling like a rules lawyer, particularly during important moments in a game, and especially during events with packs, promos, or even more on the line. Still, hopefully these are teething issues that will improve as time goes on. Lastly, erratas designed to change the way that a card functions in order to functionally buff or nerf the card. This is the worst possible form of erratas and something I don't believe Riot has engaged with yet. All Riftbound cards still do in spirit what's printed on the card. But if they were ever to, say, nerf Draven by adding a exhaust me 2 clause to his card draw ability, this would be a pretty rough situation. Now, I have purposefully included an example that might potentially be needed someday, because Draven is so firmly seated at the top of the meta at the moment. Is errataing a card better than banning a card? Well, this is really interesting in Riftbound, particularly because of legends and how they are always there during games, so you always know what they do, and how they dictate deck building. So in terms of legends, probably yes, errating doesn't outright murder a full deck, but in terms of all other cards in the game, I think it's generally better to ban a card than having to keep a library or cheat sheet of all the functionally buffed or nerfed cards in the game. Lastly, I'll just cover reflexive triggers. Personally, I don't really like the mechanics of reflexive triggers. I think overall what the mechanic offers the game isn't worth the trade-off. Playing devil's advocate, it does add a layer of potential interactivity and skill by allowing players to interact during the resolution of the effects of a spell or ability. For example, Rel Magnetic, it allows your opponent to see what's played and then cast reactions before the equipment becomes attached. But it also adds complexity to the game by needing to understand reflexive triggers. Furthermore, I think reflexive triggers are an unintuitive mechanic for a lot of TCG players, let alone non-TCG players. So hopefully, Riot continues to listen to feedback about this, and we'll see if they are still featuring prominently in sets 2 to 3 years from now. Alright, so we're going to present the questions again in a more complete form, and again the timestamp is in the description for the bonus question. Consult the past. It is your turn. You have a Vanguard Sergeant at a battlefield. You hide your Consult the Past there. Can you reveal and play the Consult the Past immediately to draw 2 cards? No. You may only play the card at the beginning of the next turn. The value will just have to wait. Deflect. Your opponent has a Pouty Porro at a battlefield. You have a Leona Determined at your base. You move in, initiating a combat showdown. As Leona is designated an attacker, her attack trigger goes off at the only target available, the Pouty Porro. Do you have to pay the deflect cost and recycle 1 rune? No. Deflect is a mandatory additional cost when you play spells or abilities that target. It is not mandatory to pay this cost on triggered abilities and reflexive triggers. So if you feel confident that your Leona can win in combat, you can decline to pay the cost of Deflect and let Leona and the Pouty Porro duke it out. Imperial Decree. Your opponent has 3 Deadbloom Predators at a battlefield. You have 3 recruits at base. You play Imperial Decree and move all 3 recruits into the battlefield at the same time. Do you kill all of their pesky Deadblooms? No. During the combat damage step, you must assign lethal damage to 1 unit before moving on to the next. This does not take into consideration abilities that would cause any point of damage to become lethal, such as Imperial Decree. The much better option would have been to send each recruit in 1 by 1, with each instance of combat killing off 1 Deadbloom Predator. But instead, you've chosen poorly, so your 3 recruits will violently kill only 1 Deadbloom Predator. Reaver's Row. You have a Vanguard Sergeant at Reaver's Row. Your opponent moves his Yasuo Remorseful into the battlefield, starting a combat showdown. This activates his attack trigger, which will deal his might in damage to your unit. Are you able to move your unit back to base using Reaver's Row before it dies? Yes. This question asks what happens when both attack and defend triggers go on the chain together. Attack triggers go on the chain first, then defend triggers. Then chains will resolve with the newest item to the chain resolving first. So your Vanguard Sergeant will bravely return to base and Yasuo will conquer unimpeded. Volibear. Your opponent has a Volibear at base. You have a Travelling Merchant at your base. It's your opponent's turn. They move their Volibear into a battlefield, starting a combat showdown. When you are given focus, you play Ride the Wind on your Travelling Merchant into the other battlefield. Which ability resolves first? Your travelling merchants discard and draw. This question asks what happens when two triggered abilities are triggered simultaneously. When this happens, the triggered ability of the player whose turn it is goes on the chain first. This is distinctly different from when there's attacker and defender triggers, which we covered in another scenario. When you play Ride the Wind on your travelling merchant, because it's your opponent's turn, their Volibear move trigger goes on the chain first, followed by yours. So you draw your card first and, oh look, a Defy. When your opponent draws, they immediately play Gust on your travelling merchant, which you promptly counter. Then, after Volibear conquers, another showdown occurs at travelling merchant's battlefield and you conquer too. And you score at the start of your next turn for holding to boot. Lucky you drew first. Well, hope that tickled the old noodle. Let me know what other mistakes I've made and if you have any questions about Spiritforged scenarios or Origin scenarios in the comments. Catch you in the next one.